Good morning, everyone, and welcome to TBR's webcast, How the Rise of Private Cloud is Reshuffling the Cloud Landscape, recapping customer adoption of private cloud as reported in our Private Cloud Customer Report, which is part of our Cloud Customer Portfolio Research. My name is Allison Crawford, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Over the next hour, Senior Analyst Alan Kranz will walk you through some of the high-level findings on customer behavior, vendor perception, and opportunity we uncovered as part of this research, followed by an opportunity to ask questions about the results. Before I pass this over to Alan, there are a few logistics I'd like to cover. First, we're recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function to the right of your screen. Alan will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to Alan at the end of the webinar to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find these slides as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight, and I'll share all the social media links with you again at the end of our presentation. Now let me introduce Alan Kranz. Alan is one of our senior analysts within the TBR software and cloud practice. In addition to leading our consulting program within software, he has also been leading the analyst teams across software, hardware, services, during the launch of our newly initiated cloud program. Alan is one of our lead cloud software spokespersons, providing both analytics and strategic advice, helping vendors identify new opportunities and revenue streams. And obviously that was not a cloud audio problem we had just there. Sorry about that, folks. So with that, let me hand this over to Alan.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm excited to be here with you to share research that we've been working on throughout, starting in the spring, really developing throughout the course of the summer, and publishing now in the fall. And so we'll share results from our private cloud study. But I wanted to take a step back and orient you to the different ways that we look at and analyze cloud. It starts with, and this is a consistent taxonomy that we use across different market segments here at TBR, but it starts with a deep understanding of the vendors within a certain space, and writing quarterly, semi-annual reports to tie back to the business results around a certain area, and so we've certainly done that with cloud. And then taking a little bit broader view, bringing those vendors in as well as the broader landscape, analyzing their financial results each quarter, as well as the qualitative trends that are really driving change for both the vendors and the customers within a certain space, and doing that with our benchmark reports. We have 3 of those in cloud. We'll highlight them on the next slide, but it really provides a little bit broader industry context for the specific vendors that we're tracking on a quarter-to-quarter basis. And then finally, and this will draw in a lot of the research for today's presentation, is to combine that view with an external customer-facing perspective that looks at from a true industry landscape, what's driving adoption, what the perception of the vendors in is. It all ties it back again to the vendor business models and opportunity, but it provides a pure customer view into what's actually happening out in the market. So we find it's a lot of times a valid checkpoint and a context point to have as we look at the vendors to really complement that with a deep understanding of the customer landscape as well. So within cloud, we have 23 vendor reports that we're publishing on a semi-annual basis, as well as bringing those in, as well as the broader context for the cloud benchmarks. And so a lot of you will be familiar with the public cloud benchmark, looks at that pure public cloud space. We've done that for a number of years. This year added the managed private and professional services cloud benchmark, as well as the cloud components benchmark. And the important thing to highlight is So underlying all of this research is a common taxonomy that defines the market, the segments, the vendors that are participating. And so as we go into the customer tracks, there's alignment between, today we'll cover the private cloud report. We're covering the deep vendor business models as part of both the vendor reports themselves, but also in that managed private cloud and professional services benchmark, as well as the cloud components benchmark, which we're going to be launching in January. So with those three reports, you can really understand what's driving the behavior from the customer perspective, the perception of vendors from that landscape, but also have that deep business model financial results view that's included in the benchmark to come at the research in a number of different ways. And we found that's been beneficial for a lot of our clients to have multiple viewpoints into a single market to assist in planning and really understanding a market. So in addition to the private cloud results, which we'll highlight today, we're publishing the hybrid cloud adoption report, which ties in public cloud services being used in conjunction with other delivery methods, but being managed and orchestrated in a way that we haven't seen yet today through our research. So a lot of change going on there that we'll highlight in that hybrid cloud adoption study. And then one of our longest running cloud studies, the cloud professional services, looks at the need from the customer perspective in terms of what supports, services, consulting, management capabilities do they need and are using as they make this transition along their cloud maturity path. And that will be publishing quite shortly as well. The methodology that we're using for our cloud program this year, in aggregate there's going to be 2,200 surveys, but the way we've segmented it I think is important and speaks to some of the value of the research. So the private cloud adoption report, we're going to be doing 650 surveys a year. That's segmented into two deliverables. So we're doing, we did 325 surveys as part of the research that we'll highlight today. We're going to go back out to field early in 2014. And what that will enable us to do is not only get a good representation across the different verticals, geographies that we're covering, because it is a global study, but also be able to add in change over time elements to the research so that we can really track the market on an ongoing basis, identify what's changing, what's not, how's the market developing, update estimates, update our findings in terms of the opportunity and behavior so that it really is actionable and recent in terms of making decisions in real time, because we do see quite rapid change in this market. And so we're taking that same approach with the other segments as well. And so across that, there'll be the capability to track this very broad opportunity in terms of cloud overall, but do it in a way that isn't just updated once a year. So with that, that's kind of the background, the methodology, the approach. We'll dive into what this will be a summary of the private cloud study results. The full report, I think, goes up to 60 or 70 slides, so there's much more extensive views included in that. And it covers different geographies, verticals. The customer segment is all large enterprise, so we used 1,000 and up in the U.S., 500 and up as we went overseas to account for that. So it does focus on that larger segment of clients. So with that, we'll go into the findings. So for private cloud overall, and we've tracked this market over the past 2 years, I think now more than ever, we've seen this evolution from a reactionary trial-based adoption of private clouds, and it's already become quite more business-focused and focused around vendors that are really demonstrating their expertise in this area. So from the opportunity, that perspective, we've tracked this market as it's grown to about $32 billion this year, and the key components of that are both these managed private clouds, which have been a real opportunity for the SIs and service providers to become involved in this and actually delivering the services that are being consumed by customers, as well as the self-built side of this market where we've seen customers investing in tools, infrastructure, software to build their own environments, to modernize data centers. So those two markets really going forward, I think that is what will drive the private cloud space to the $69 billion estimate in 2018 over the next 5 years. But the drivers of that we see as shifting going forward. And that when we say business focused, let me take a minute to explain a little bit about what that means, because I think it's an important dynamic that we've been tracking for quite some time in this market. In that a lot of the early adoption of this we've seen was driven by the IT side of the house, but that going forward, beyond those initial experiences, a lot of them come through that managed private cloud environment where they're working with a service provider to meet a short-term, many times IT-focused need in terms of additional capacity or expansion capability. Going forward to justify those larger investments, the more core applications and workloads, there's this requirement to build a firmer business case. For a lot of the customers that we've spoken with, this continues to be an area of challenge, of something that they're still grappling, getting their hands around. A lot of times because it's not the IT department that really holds the answers and the capabilities to deliver that. So a lot of need there to bring greater alignment between those two sides of the house going forward. And when we think about this market overall, we still see this, it's a new concept. Cloud overall is a new concept. Private cloud is on the next edge of that new delivery method. A lot of uncertainty in terms of how best to use, manage, deploy it. And so with that, there's a lot of fear that's driven on the part of customers in terms of how should it be used, how can we make this transition, what assurances do I have that there are fail-safes in place, that this roadmap is going to be a safe journey for me. And so as part of that, the best way that we've seen for people in general or customers in this case to get past those barriers is to look to really document, plan, understand. So that's taken some time to develop, but still a lot more to be done there in terms of, and a lot of times they're looking for that outside help to come in, help them understand all the costs and requirements associated with how they do it today, how that can be different with a private cloud environment, and then what are the next steps to get there, because I think that's where a lot of customers are. They've adopted certain segments of private cloud for workloads, but to really broaden that going forward, that's the challenge that they face to overcome the barriers with this new delivery method. So from the customer landscape, what we're seeing is, as we saw as we tracked this market 18 months ago with our first study here, this perception of security was a huge driver for adoption. Customers believing that unless there were regulations, stringent requirements around certain workloads, that private cloud would not have been the best delivery method choice for those types of scenarios. But even at that time, we saw those early adopters who had moved multiple workloads, who had been early on in terms of building their own environments, really speak to the benefits in terms of cost and efficiency, both from the IT side as well as from the process side, that they were able to experience and that formed the baseline for their rapid adoption of private cloud environments. And so when it was great to see with this study, when we went out and refreshed it, that now cost and efficiency are the biggest drivers for private cloud adoption, that yes, security is still important, but that is more of a requirement across any workload that's being delivered, not just something that drives private cloud adoption. And that customers, even though they're still struggling with the business case in many many cases, they have been able to realize cost savings and efficiency through the use of these private cloud technologies. So we see that as a big shift in the customer landscape and something that will drive the additional growth going forward. From the competitive side, when we looked at top-of-mind vendors, perceptions of those vendors, I think the biggest thing that came out to us was this is not a case where customers are necessarily only looking to their traditional providers, their current providers for these private cloud technologies. They are looking for the top-of-mind leaders in this space that have demonstrated those capabilities which help them overcome that fear, provide them the certainty they need to go forward with adoption. And so vendors at this point are really winning on their own merits in terms of both on the technology side and the marketing side. Can they get that message out that they are experts here, that they can safely lead customers down this path? So those are the top 3 overall findings. With that, we'll go into a little bit more detail in terms of the study and the results that support those. So here we're tracking the size of the market as it evolves. So we've seen it grow from about $8 billion in 2010, tripling to $32 billion, and then we're expecting that to double again as we go forward over the next 5 years. And so the things that we see, I'll start with the drivers on the bottom that really support this growth going forward. So far, it's been the tight data center capacity that came up in a number of interviews. Enhanced security and processes. Again, it may not be have the same type of perception of defining the delivery method as it did in the past, but it's certainly still a critical element that we believe will drive the growth going forward. And particularly when you look at private versus public cloud choices, this really opens it up to a new set of workloads. And so that aspect of security, both in terms of actual data security as well as the performance and the reliability, those are the things that will truly be a driver for private cloud on a continued basis, as well as demonstration of the total cost of ownership for those environments. For the self-built, obviously it's more involved. For the managed private cloud, it can be a simpler calculation, but we have spoke with a number of customers across the board that this is one of the drivers that they're using to justify additional adoption going forward. On the barrier side, the public cloud accessibility was an interesting one because when we looked at from a geographic perspective, from a workload perspective, what the alignment between public and private cloud was, there is an interplay between these two delivery methods that, particularly in North America, where the network infrastructure is such, the offerings are such, that public cloud has really grown quite rapidly, in certain workloads around applications, CRM, that type of availability and the size of those bases, in some respect, changes the landscape for where private cloud can grow because it's really grown into a proven technology and delivery method for those workloads. Haven't seen, it's a different landscape as we go overseas, but still, the availability and the acceptance of public cloud for certain workloads certainly impacts the private cloud capabilities and the levels of adoption available for customers. Budgetary pressure, I think, is omnipresent across all of the customers that we spoke with, and it just really heightens the importance of those business cases so that, yes, even in stringent budget requirements and scenarios, there can be that business case for private cloud, particularly as you look at the pivot in terms of the choice between maintaining the status quo, continuing to invest and maintain assets. That's one of the trigger points that we've seen for evaluation and adoption of private clouds is coming to the realization that the current path is no longer sustainable, that there needs to be a change, and that private cloud is then considered as one of those alternatives. But really the biggest barrier that's pervasive across this market is the immature business case around complex workloads. So for a lot of the workloads that we've seen to date, they are simpler in nature. A fair amount of them are focused on capacity, are driven from the IT side, but when we look at that future adoption, there are those ERP, custom apps, things that are much more core to the business, but also involve a lot more complexity in terms of the back end. The transition will be much more difficult, a lot more at stake. So, again, whenever that fear quotient increases, that's where the additional documentation, the metrics, the tracking, the management of that from a financial and a business perspective comes into play, and that's where customers are really looking for both help within the organization as well as outside the organization to enable that. So playing off that customer landscape, this is the next kind of lens that we've used. We've used it across a couple different studies, but let me orient you a little bit to this concept of buyer types and how it relates to these views of both the public and the private cloud. So the first buyer type, and we've combined the buy and build outcomes. So these are people that either want to outsource through either traditional means or cloud, but they want to consume the benefits of a workload. It's not as important for them to be involved, and many times it's a benefit not to be involved in the development, architecture, the IT side of how things get delivered. It's about the ultimate service that's delivered for them. The build outcomes, same type of perspective. They may be focusing a little bit further down the stack, still adding some custom development on top of those outcomes that come from the infrastructure level. So there's some level of customization, but for both these types of buyers, it's about getting the benefits of simplicity, getting the benefits of a service, and that so you can see from a public cloud perspective, great fit there. A lot of customers fit into this profile to some degree and have really driven the market opportunity around public cloud, stemming from the SaaS, infrastructure, platform, all elements of the stack, but they're looking to consume that service without having to incur the upfront costs, manage that environment, devote the resources required to do that. The second category of buyer is the own and control. So these are people that are much more driven by the IT function, that they see it as a core competency to develop those solutions themselves, to have control over the architecture and the infrastructure, and to build that as part of their core competency. So when we think about the advent of cloud, it was not really a fit for this category of buyer. Not a lot of offerings or opportunity for them to do the public cloud because they did not want to cede that control to the third party in terms of how it was built, how it was delivered and maintained. With the growth in private cloud, all of a sudden you see new ways to cater to these two groups of buyers. For some of the workloads that if folks wanted to buy outcomes, that was their orientation as a buyer, but they still, if it was they're in a regulated industry, there's certain workloads that too sensitive to put on a public cloud, weren't a fit. That was a no-go for them in terms of moving forward with the available public clouds. However, with these managed private cloud environments from service providers, from the infrastructure providers themselves, we've seen tremendous growth there. All of a sudden, there's a way to both buy those outcomes, but also meet the security and the availability requirements that they had. So, we've seen modest growth in terms of those managed cloud services as these buyers are all of a sudden able to consume cloud in a way that fits their business. But the real, the bigger market opportunity that we've seen is allowing this own and control segment that public cloud was not a fit at all. They needed to manage that environment themselves, and so this has been the way that they've been able to achieve cloud, but do it in a way that they can still remain true to their, own and control IT as a core competency, build the clouds themselves. Obviously, much bigger deal sizes, a lot of investment going on there. It's a smaller segment of customers, but the spend is truly, much larger than the subscription-based models, which drove a lot of the market opportunity around the self-built private clouds. So some of the view that we have here is actually a combination of the customer side research, so looking at the different categories of buyers, their perceptions, their needs, their desires, and then combining that with the vendor side in terms of the market sizing, who are the leaders. So in that self-built private cloud bucket, we're excited to go in and size this part of the market because it's going to be, again, represented in that cloud components benchmark where we segment it up, look at the leading vendors, their growth over time. But when you think about this, opportunity, there are different types of buyers out there that private cloud is a fit for, and so catering to all types of buyers with cloud, I think is where the market is going. Certainly as we get into hybrid, that's the evolution. But private cloud is truly matured in a way that caters to a much broader set of customers, and we've seen this play out across geographies as well, that public cloud is a great fit where the network is available, that the services are available, that the customers are comfortable and familiar with the technology. But the private cloud, it really fills a lot of those gaps for both the customers and the availability of cloud services, and that's driven a lot of the growth that we've seen so far. So speaking a little bit about those differences in customers, when we looked at the two different types of cloud services, obviously it's interesting to contrast the market size with the adoption rates, because when we went out and conducted this study, we looked at, for those that have adopted private cloud services, what's the segmentation between a managed environment where a third party actually owns it and delivers it, and the self-built where customer retains ownership of the infrastructure and delivers it as an internal private cloud. And so these quotes, we included them because they really represent the different buyer types that we highlighted on the other side. The first, with the managed, there's, they want that seamless fit, and I think that's where private cloud a lot of times comes in. It's not just a cash and carry public type cloud. It's integrated into their business, delivered with the same type of security and performance that they would expect from internal IT or better, and it's something that they don't have to manage themselves. So there's a lot of benefit there. And then they have, I like to call this guy Mr. Marbles, because he wants to hold on to all that control himself. He doesn't want to cede that responsibility. He wants to make sure that he's active both in terms of building and looking after those assets as they're used to deliver. So this is a customer that would not have been a cloud customer 5 years ago if there's only public cloud available. With these new types of delivery methods and tools, all of a sudden he can deliver those benefits of cloud while still maintaining that level of control. So when we go into the customer landscape, so we've done this representation. There's a couple different things to orient you to. First is, so the low-hanging fruit. These are the workloads that are more simple, less complex, that have lower risk associated with them. More of them are driven out of the IT side of the house in terms of additional compute storage capacity, coming to the end of data center capacity, meeting those needs. That's where a lot of the early workloads that we've seen driven came out of. So that's driven a lot of the current adoption. As we get into what we're calling the high-hanging fruit, those are the more complex workloads, the more core to the business workloads, the custom applications, ERP. Those are things that are going to require more assistance from both the vendor and the customer side in terms of proving the business case to go forward. So the quote there, I think, really wraps it up very well. It sums up a lot of the comments that we received back through the interviews that we conducted during the course of the research, that they're very crude measurements today, that they need refinement, and that, you know, in all actuality, they'll be looking for outside help, services assistance to come in and do consulting work around this, to do the requirements and help them through the business case, and in developing the KPIs on the back end so that they can document and measure this going forward. Those are the type, I think that speaks to a true opportunity there that came up again and again in terms of helping with the business case, and that being a requirement, certainly to move some of those higher hanging fruit workloads forward. So when we look a little bit more deeply about, on the left side, we're starting with the customer purchasing landscape and the level of importance that adopters reported in terms of how they selected a vendor. And so the real interesting thing that came out to us is a lot of knowledge, perception of both cloud, industry, professional services, really leading those things that were important to customers in terms of who they selected as a vendor. And at the absolute bottom of the list is this past vendor relationship. So from a vendor perspective, there's a couple of different ways to view this. First is for traditional providers, those customers that you're catering to today may not necessarily be your customers for private cloud, that it's really the requirement is there to win them over again, to demonstrate that you're a leader in private cloud, that you have the expertise, the track record to alleviate their fear and uncertainty about this migration. So certainly, the possibility is there to retain them, but the onus is on demonstrating private cloud capabilities on their own rather than simply relying on those past relationships to form that bridge over as part of that migration. From the vendor landscape, obviously this is a summary we included most of the vendors that we went out and sampled out, got feedback around as part of the study here. So it covers a lot of different markets. It's a lot of different ways to monetize and develop a business model around private cloud. But the vendors that stood out across the board were Microsoft, IBM, HP, and Dell. And so part of this is obviously for Microsoft and IBM, there's a lot of different ways to monetize this. There's a real broad set of offerings that make them top of mind, that play into that overall cloud knowledge. So certainly there are advantages for them, not so much in just the breadth of the traditional base, but the breadth of the cloud base that they've been able to develop provides a lot of touch points, which I think provide that differentiation and benefit for those two vendors. For HP and Dell, we saw them show up much more prominently in the component side. And so when we think about the size of the different markets involved here, that infrastructure level, providing the underlying compute, storage, management layers, those are all critical elements that are going to drive significant spend for those customers that are going through that self-built method. And so that's a lot of what drives their top of mind perception in terms of the early results here. So far from set. Some of the ways that I think the market will change going forward is obviously with 70% of the private cloud customers using this managed method, for all of the traditional infrastructure providers, that makes those service providers a key target to monetize this this market on the back end, to be the support and infrastructure to deliver the actual managed cloud services. I don't think the importance of that market can be understated, because it's going to be a huge opportunity in terms of the spend. It may not show up as much in terms of when we go out and talk to customers, because they're dealing with their service provider. They're dealing with the folks that are managing the private cloud environment for them. But on the back end, it's a huge opportunity to be part of that delivery model for them. And then lastly, for the landscape going forward, one of the other things that we think could really shift the opportunity and the dynamics from the vendor side are these cloud standards platforms. What a lot of customers have been looking for are these standards so that they can have the ability to move data back and forth, to maintain investments that are built on one platform, transition that to another delivery method. Eroding some of the cloud lock-in, I think, has been top of mind for a lot of customers in this space, and certainly impacting some of their decisions going forward. So as we look at, we ask people their current platforms going forward, we saw much more of an increase in evaluation awareness for OpenStack, CloudStack, Cloud Foundry, that we expect to see much more investment on top of these platforms going forward, and that the impact could be this more standards that allow customers to move between clouds in a much more agile way. We've seen a lot of temporary, stopgap measures where businesses are actually being developed around enabling email to migrate between clouds, to transfer data back and forth. Cloud standards, I think, will be a better solution to that in the long run. Certainly, there will be time before that really develops into a capability that a lot of customers are able to capitalize on. But at least the awareness of and evaluation of these standards is the first step to do that. So in summary, as we look at the private cloud market, we do expect to see tremendous continued growth, but that there will be a number of shifts that occur in terms of, from the customer landscape, more evaluation in terms of who the real leaders are in terms of both the marketing as well as the technology and the assets that are out there. We've included some early satisfaction results, but truly, until customers gain more experience with this, I think they're feeling out what the expectations should be. The same thing is going on the vendor side in terms of what capabilities are required, who's the best to deliver them, how it should all come together. It's still very much in flux, and so we expect to see a lot of the perception and satisfaction change over time. But that the onus is really on the vendors at this point to continue that education, get customers more comfortable, help them build the business case to go forward, and then demonstrate that with the actual services and results that are delivered. But overall, so again, we'll be tracking this market going forward. We'll be getting an update in early 2014 to see how things have changed. But already we've seen tremendous evolution in this market as it's grown from less than $10 billion three years ago on the path to $69 billion in 2018. So with that, I will turn it back to Allison, and I think we'll open it up to questions.
Great, thanks, Alan, and thanks for those of you who sent the questions through already. If you have any questions, now is the time to send them through. Alan, the first question we got was, how will private cloud impact public cloud adoption?
So, to date, I think it's actually been public cloud that's impacted private cloud's adoption, just due to the head start that public cloud had in terms of building up the base of customers. We see a majority of customers using public cloud at this point in certain regards. But going forward, I think you will see, particularly around the platforms for development, It seems like there's a tremendous amount of offerings on the public cloud side for those platforms. We've seen tremendous interest from the private cloud side, and I think it goes back to those standards and those frameworks for development that private cloud, I think, can provide more of that control and insurance that they'll be able to migrate, retain ownership of that underlying platform, regardless of the services and how those delivery methods change. So I think that would probably be the biggest impact we would see private cloud having on the public environment, is a shift in emphasis away from or more towards private cloud development environments rather than a lot of the growth in public cloud development platforms that we've seen.
Okay. The next question we had come through, how will hybrid cloud change the market going forward?
So we do expect a tremendous amount of impact from hybrid because, going forward we expect it to be, that is really the end state that a lot of customers want to get to. We talk about data portability, flexibility, efficiency, only being able to adopt either public or private or traditional architectures is a limitation that I think customers will increasingly come up against as they mature their cloud usage. For a lot of customers today, just getting some workloads on private cloud is their focus. However, they do have that hybrid cloud on the horizon in the environment. They're planning for it. I think that was, as we talk about the findings from the hybrid cloud study that's coming out, that most of these are planned in advance. We had this, partially expectation going in that a lot of customers have started with public cloud, moved some workloads onto private cloud, and get in this instance where they're kind of stuck in these different silos, and at that point want to hybridize and be able to leverage both delivery techniques within workloads and across workloads. However, when we went out and tested that, for the early adopters at least, most of them have planned well in advance to implement hybrid cloud within their environment, and so it really has been a deliberate movement towards using some aspects of public, private, and then integrating them so that it's optimized. And I think that's a key enabler for the efficiency that customers ultimately want to get out of cloud. It's that automated management and integration that will ultimately deliver that. Right now it's a difficult solution, but we see more services and offerings coming there to address that pain point.
Okay. Another question we had come through. What is the impact of Amazon Web Services selling the CAA a $600 million private AWS cloud for the intelligence community and beating out IBM as the incumbent vendor?
So I also have Jillian Morandi, lead analyst on AWS. I'll have her jump in as well. But I think from my perspective, it truly validates AWS as an enterprise IT provider. That it both validates AWS and I think truly, I think it highlights a challenge for the traditional vendors, not just IBM, but the other large IT vendors, that they truly do have to worry about the smaller pure play cloud vendors, that their presence in the enterprise is not a guarantee going forward. And so I think you've seen already reaction and adjustment to that to really provide the cloud services that sometimes compete with AWS. That's been something that I think they've largely tried to avoid to some degree. But I think this deal says, pretty clearly that that is not a viable strategy forever, that providing, those services is something that they're going to have to do so that they can, protect the enterprise base that they have.
Yeah, this is Jillian. I completely agree with Alan. I just want to add that Amazon Web Services beat IBM in the deal on a number of different areas. So scalability, flexibility, security, And I think it was really a wake-up call for the enterprise community. If Amazon, can beat IBM in the CIA, they're here to stay. They're playing. It just, like Alan said, validates this new type of vendor's presence. Now, mind you, this deal is a bit different than a traditional AWS deal because Amazon is building inside of the CIA's data center, something that they never would normally do. But in speaking with Amazon, there's just such a need in the government space right now that the government's been looking to them because no one can really provide what the government needs. And I'm thinking that's going to be the same with healthcare, maybe finance. I wouldn't be surprised to see a few more deals like that go to Amazon.
Mm-hmm. And I think I think Jill's point was an excellent one. So for the private cloud report, for a vendor like Amazon, which really grew its base on public cloud, private cloud is that next frontier. They're moving more towards those enterprise secure workloads and achieving significant growth as a result of that, opening up new customers, in this case the CIA, as well as new workloads that public cloud would not have been a fit for them. But private cloud delivers the benefits of cloud in a way that still meets all the regulatory requirements and security requirements that the CIA has.
Next question we have, last question right now in queue. How prone are customers to switching vendors for private cloud?
So when we went out and tested, we looked at current adoption, willingness to switch and evaluate, or willingness to evaluate other providers. We've seen that evaluation at this stage very high, almost across the board. A majority of customers are willing to evaluate alternative delivery methods, alternative vendors in this space. So a lot of customer education going on in terms of who that leader in cloud that they want to go with is. However, there is still a tremendous gap between actual evaluation and then making the switch. So I don't think it's a case where you're going to see tremendous churn, but certainly a lot of eyes and ears are open, even if they have a first or a second provider that they've adopted with and gained experience with. They are not wedded to these vendors at this point. They are still looking as this vendor and offering environment develops, so that they can evaluate changes as they become sufficiently wooed to make that transition. And certainly, I think some of those standards and platforms will play a part in terms of what the barriers to exit and entry are across vendors in this space. So I think that will have an impact on just how easy the transition is between vendors.
Okay. We don't have any additional questions in queue, so with that, I think it's time to wrap up. A couple comments that I wanted to make. We had some questions about revenue splits between public and private. We'll be following up with those folks individually. And as a couple people asked, I want to remind you that we are sending the slides out to everyone who attended today's webinar by tomorrow. I have had folks have the slides go into their spam accounts since it's an attachment. So if you don't get the file from us by 5 o'clock tomorrow, please look in your spam folder. It might be hiding there on you. So with that, I want to thank everyone for taking the time today to join us. And we will be doing additional webinars. Is it just December or January, the other two parts of the reports?
The reports are publishing in November, and so we'll be doing webinars just as soon as we can get them scheduled.
Okay, so we're doing webinars very similar to this one on professional services as well as hybrid customer adoption. So please look for those invitations that will be coming out shortly. As I mentioned, I'm going to share all the social media links with you, so I encourage you to follow both Alan and TBR on Twitter at the handles listed here, as well as joining the conversation on SlideShare and YouTube and our LinkedIn pages. So we do encourage you guys to join those communities. Before you sign off, there's a quick survey that I'd like you to take. 3 quick questions. How valuable did you find the survey? How good was the presenter? And if there's any additional comments that you'd like to give us on the presentation quality. We are using this feedback to improve our presentations quarter to quarter, so any information you give us is highly valuable. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another few minutes in case anyone has any last-minute questions or would like to schedule time to speak with Alan in greater detail about this report. And if we don't hear from you, we look forward to hearing from you guys on our cloud-related research portfolio webinars going forward in the future. Thanks, everyone, and have a great morning.